This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with the run through the markets here for you. There's a lot of red ink on the board today. Cairo, Nairobi, Lagos, Johannesburg, you name it, it's probably in the red. We'll be talking about equities in Ghana shortly. Main index over there hasn't had as bad a year as Nigeria with its 15.4% drop, but it's close to that relatively speaking. Stocks in Lagos have been falling for 7 consecutive trading sessions now. They fell by as much as 1.2% early in the session. The index was being dragged much lower by falls in the big caps like Dangote Summit. Here's what's coming up tonight. Zimbabweans are facing yet another blow as the cost of power goes up by over 300%. Egypt names an executive to run its first sovereign wealth fund. And we'll explore why the Bretton Woods bodies are concerned about rising global trade tensions. Well, that and more is in the pipeline tonight. But let's start today in Zimbabwe, where authorities over there have approved a 320% electricity price hike. Now, that rise comes at a time when the Southern African nation is grappling with a severe series of power cuts, which in turn has affected domestic, industrial and commercial consumers countrywide. With the details, here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya.
The cost of power has shot up from 38.61 cents to 162.16 cents, the equivalent of 10.5 US cents per unit, an increment many could see coming, but which will still pile more misery on already encumbered businesses and workers whose salaries have remained static.
What had happened to ZESA is also a case of exchange rate adjustment, where they need to look at how the exchange rate has been moving, and the continuous fall, as I'm saying, or depreciation of the local unit is the reason why they have to adjust the rates.
The Zimbabwe dollar has been under siege, shedding more than 95% of its value since its reintroduction in June this year. Zimbabwe's power utility says the new tariff will enable it to ramp up domestic generation and pay for imports from South Africa and Mozambique, which cost about $19 million per month. But industry is worried that inefficiency in the utility, which is owed over 1.2 billion Zimbabwe dollars, will impede resolving the current crisis.
So you can actually see it's a corporate governance issue. It's a failure to invest within a time horizon which is acceptable. But at the same time, the solution does not lie in revising the tariffs. Because the tariffs, revising them up, is a way of trying to deal rather with a resident debt on the balance sheet, which is already beyond 1 billion. It's not necessarily going to improve the electricity or power distribution into the country.
Power isn't the only challenge the country is grappling with. During the 18-hour-long power cuts, businesses have had to resort to generators. But with supplies of diesel still short owing to a persistent fuel crisis, there's been little reprieve. Regular price adjustments have failed to improve supplies and have only caused the prices of goods and services to rise in an economy that has already slipped back into chronically high inflation territory. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Over in Ghana, the world's second largest cocoa producer's stock market seems to be in free fall with limited signs of recovery, if any at all. So far this year, Ghana's Stock Exchange Composite Index is the world's third worst performing equities market in dollar terms. The exchange's poor performance has been attributed to the government-led reorganization of banks in part. Ghana's deep cleanup of its banking sector has reduced the flow of credit to companies, and that in turn has dented market sentiment. Now, investors in the West African economy are also a bit reluctant to put their cash into the stock market as they keep a very close eye on the country's elections, which are due to happen next year. Investor concerns are largely focused on the risk that the Ghanaian government may spend a lot in the run-up to those elections, fueling inflation and also weakening the dollar cedi rate. So let's explore this in a bit more detail. Nabil Ahmed Rufai is running coverage for us in Ghana. He joins us now live from Accra. So Nabil, the composite has been falling for most of the year, down over 10% so far. Why is the index falling from the perspective of domestic investors?
Ramah, the index has been falling due to an increased volume in the supply on the market. Because asset managers and investors had to raise funds to meet panic withdrawals that hit the country, the banking sector in the country. We know that within the last 2 years, about 9 banks were collapsed by the central bank because they could not meet their capital requirements, and they were also declared insolvent. Now, this is a situation we find ourselves in, and asset managers and investors are struggling to raise funds to pay up, and they would have to be offloading their shares. This ultimately is actually leading to the falling in price of the composites on the market.
Ultimately, though, since the Bank of Ghana has put in a fair bit of work to clean up the banking sector, I mean, at least on paper, that should increase confidence in the banking sector, essentially push more credit into the economy. So why are we seeing this decline in relation to the cleanup of the banking sector?
Indeed, there is a correlation, Rama, because the asset managers need offloading their shares because they have to pay investors who were really affected by the crisis that hits the banks. A lot of people had to be rushing to the banks, and their monies have been locked up. And this is the situation. The banks are not being able to pay, and some of the investors had to be offloading their shares in order to meet the pressure that is coming at their end, Rama.
Indeed. So Ghana, of course, does go to the polls sometime next year. Given that fact, we've got elections coming up. Are investors also wary of pre-election spending? Because they would say, well, this might make the situation, the investment situation in Ghana, a lot worse as we head into 2020.
Well, there's always been election spending in Ghana's elections, but then some analysts say aside the 2016 election, which recorded a negative return of minus 15.33%, all other election years, 2008, 2012, saw positive returns. So with what is going on in the banking sector at the moment, the cleanup going on, they expect, although the stocks have declined, they expect to see positive returns in 2020 if investors would take advantage of the current situation by driving demand. They believe the decline in the composites, the falling composites, should actually be a booster for them if everything goes on well within the banking sector. They should see some positive returns if they really buy the stocks at this time, Rama.
Indeed, of course, we'll be keeping a very close eye on valuations and see how that plays out. One last question for you, Nabil. Ghana Central Bank this month decided to start selling forward contracts on the cedi. Was that designed to try and ease pressure on the currency in the spot market against the US dollar?
This particular move was not necessarily to ease the pressure on the forex, but we understand it was to open up the forex market and also to allow banks to have more control of the forex market, which is largely controlled by the informal sector. This particular move has nothing to do with the fact that they would want to ease the pressure on the currency, Rama.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, live there in Accra. Now, the IMF says that Nigeria urgently requires a comprehensive package of reform measures designed to raise its economic growth and enhance the quality of said growth. According to the IMF's mission chief for Nigeria, the pace of economic recovery in Africa's most populous nation, and of course its biggest oil producer, is still pretty low. The fund believes the uncertainty in President Muhammadu Buhari's economic policies has exacerbated the economic hardship that Nigerians face. The fund, however, says Nigeria's inflation rate has declined, in part due to lower food price inflation. The Nigerian president this week presented a record budget, 10.3 trillion naira, that works out, depending on the exchange rate that you use, to about $28 or so billion for 2020. That is the first spending plan that he's presented to lawmakers since his re-election in February. The plan for Africa's top oil exporter assumes that crude oil output will be about 2.18 million barrels a day, and oil prices will be hovering at an average of $57 per barrel. South Sudan's government, in the meantime, says it has contained an oil leak in the northern end of the country. A ruptured oil pipeline in the former Unity State has been leaking oil into the area, polluting the local ground for at least 2 weeks. But as CGTN's Patrick Oyet now explains, the authorities in Juba say more oil pipelines may rupture as it makes plans to boost its oil output.
South Sudan government says the oil leak in late September occurred in an old section of the pipeline. A halt in oil production during the war forced the government to pump water into the pipes, making them rusty and weak. Juba says it is working to minimize pollution related to oil production. South Sudan's Petroleum Ministry says it is checking all pipelines as it endeavors to boost oil production in the country.
What is important is for you to respond to those leakages from time to time, and this is what the team has done. Just in 2 days, they were able to control the flow of the oil from the leak point, and of course it was repaired immediately. And then now what is left is for us to clean up the soil that is around that area.
South Sudan's Petroleum Ministry says it will publish all information related to oil production in the country to promote transparency in the sector. The ministry also says it will begin an environmental audit next week. South Sudan is currently producing 180,000 barrels of oil a day. The government says it is aiming to increase production to pre-war levels of 320,000 barrels a day by 2020. South Sudan's government depends on oil money to fund 98% of its budget. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa and Uganda's President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni have agreed to form a joint commission designed to fast-track investments between the two countries. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria filed this report a little earlier.
The Zimbabwe leader is in Uganda to explore opportunities for future investments. President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his Ugandan counterpart Yoweri Museveni have agreed to convene an investment forum for both countries to share business opportunities.
We are determined because we receive the support of our brothers and sisters on the entire continent. Member states of the AU support us in the course we are taking. And we believe that with the support, diplomatic and material support we receive from our senior presidents like President Museveni, we shall succeed.
Zimbabwe is going through an economic crisis with high inflation rates leading to the spiraling cost of living. President Mnangagwa concedes his country is not doing well due to sanctions imposed on it by the US and EU powers. The sanctions against Zimbabwe were imposed when Robert Mugabe was still president. The restrictions have had a devastating impact on ordinary citizens who now can't afford basic supplies like food, water or gas. Zimbabwe is unable to get funding from international financial institutions like the World Bank or IMF.
Currently, it is true, Zimbabwe has survived up to date because we are focused on our own domestic resources. For the last 20 years, we have never received lines of credit. Whatever we have in Zimbabwe is on the basis of our own domestic resources, plus both political and material support from our sister countries on the continent.
Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni says President Mnangagwa's visit will deepen ties and improve trade between the two countries.
This brotherhood, this solidarity, come and visit me, let me visit you, is both protocol but also business. Because when you visit, you see, you learn, then you know how to take advantage of the relationship.
The Southern African countries have already called on the US and EU to lift sanctions against Zimbabwe for the economy to pick up. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Entebbe, Uganda.
Right, then I'll run through some company headlines. Now, let's start with Zimbabwe's neighbour. Zambia's Konkola copper mines, or KCM as it's more commonly known, has closed down its smelter for annual maintenance after a leak there. The closure of the facility comes just 2 days earlier than planned. It will remain shut, however, for all of 40 days. Vedanta Resources, which owns the majority of KCM, is currently locked in a dispute with the Zambian government. The dispute comes after Lusaka appointed a liquidator to run the company, which is Africa's largest copper producer. It's essentially accused of breaching the terms of its license. Kenya's largest bank in terms of its customer base, Equity Bank, is set to get a $125 million discount essentially on the purchase of 4 banks in Rwanda, Zambia, Mozambique and Tanzania. The lender will offer about 7% of its shares, worth about $105 million, to Atlas Mara. The London-listed investment group says a deal with Equity triggered a reassessment of the value of the 4 banks, and that prompted fresh due diligence on its financial health. Staying in Kenya, the country's largest telco by customer numbers, Safaricom, has unveiled a new logo for the next 7 days in honor of Eliud Kipchoge. The M-Pesa logo is now essentially Eliud 159. It pays homage to the greatest marathoner in the world. Safaricom is showing its support for Kipchoge in his challenge to become the first ever human being to run a full marathon in under 2 hours, breaking that 2-hour marathon barrier. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Egypt has appointed an executive to run its first sovereign wealth fund. And why is Zambia so keen on taxing Netflix? We'll look at that argument when we return.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed, and this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Let's head over to Egypt now. The authorities over there have set up a sovereign wealth fund, and they have chosen an executive director to lead this new body. The fund will essentially be responsible for key government investments. CGTN's Yasser Kim has the details about the Egypt Fund, as it's known, and its importance to the North African economy.
an Egyptian sovereign wealth fund is finally a reality. A preliminary capital of $13 billion have been allocated for the fund.
We have about 120 state-owned companies and 9 holding companies, but they are all dispersed. We also have extra cash revenue from the export of natural gas in addition to the assets owned by the government. Once they are all under the wealth fund, they will be well managed in a way that would create badly needed revenue for the state.
Nothing has been announced yet on the type of investments expected by the sovereign fund. The board of directors is chaired by the Minister of Planning, Halil Said, and includes investment and financial experts. To appoint a director, the government has been working for months, meeting several candidates and discussing the best possible person to lead this fund. Ayman Suleiman has been chosen as the new director of the Egypt Sovereign Fund. He has a wide range of experience in the investment sector. Ayman Suleiman is to map out a plan for the structure and operations of the fund.
Ayman, the new director, is the co-founder of a European electronic bank. He orchestrated the acquisition of an Italian telecoms giant, Wind, by Egypt's Orascom Telecom. He has a strong CV with experience in various sectors, including real estate, telecoms, direct investments, international acquisitions and mergers.
Egypt is following in the footsteps of other countries, regionally and internationally.
Many countries have established wealth funds worth trillions of dollars. The largest sovereign fund in the world is Norway's, and in the region is Abu Dhabi. Second largest worldwide is China. Saudi fund is one of the largest as well.
Experts believe the fund is an essential tool to boost investments.
The fund has its own laws and regulations which protect it from the complicated state bureaucracy and red tape which Egypt has suffered from for years. Decision-making and implementation is much faster, and the management team is highly qualified to achieve the targets set by the directors.
The government says the revenue from the Sovereign Wealth Fund will help support the state budget and annual expenditure. Yes Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, Zambia, that Africa's second largest copper producer, says it now wants to start taxing Netflix. According to the government, the money being generated by streaming services of that sort should be taxed, essentially the point of consumption. The authorities are also concerned that most local television stations in Zambia are depending on foreign content. And that in turn has prompted the government to compel them to meet a 60% quota for local content. As of April 2019, Netflix had over 148 million paid subscriptions worldwide. 60 million of those were in the United States. Including free trials, Netflix has over 154 million clients around the world. Elsewhere, UNICEF has announced that it is now accepting and will disperse donations through cryptocurrencies like Ethereum and Bitcoin. The organization will also be using cryptocurrencies to fund open source tech through its newly established UNICEF Cryptocurrency Fund, or UCF if you will. Now, the move is part of UNICEF's ongoing work with blockchain tech. Contributions, however, under this new structure will be held and distributed in the exact same digital currency. There's no conversion into fiat currencies like the sterling pound or the US dollar here. The first contribution is expected to be received from the Ethereum Foundation. It should go to 3 grantees of the UNICEF Innovation Fund. The African Export-Import Bank is considering listing on the main market segment of the London Stock Exchange to fund its expanding operations and take advantage of the opportunities opened by increased trade across the continent. Now, the news comes as an interesting boost to the UK's anemic IPO market, which is currently suffering from a dearth of new listings, as a possibility of crashing out of the EU without a deal hangs over the country's economy and capital markets. The Pan-African Trade Finance Group was set up in 1993. Since then, it's provided over $69 billion of trade financing support in the over 50 countries in which it operates. Now on to monetary policy issues. Uganda's central bank has cut the country's policy rate by 100 basis points to 9% as part of broader efforts to spur economic growth. This is the first rate cut since October last year. Last month, in fact, Uganda's headline inflation fell to a 16-month low. It actually eased slightly to 1.9% from 2.1% the month before. CGTN's Michael Baleke has been looking at the numbers.
Only a handful of shoppers are passing through Nakawa Market in the capital Kampala. Annunciata Ashaba sells second-hand doormats and bedsheets in this usually busy open market. But she says recently her work has not been as rewarding.
People don't have money anymore. The profit margins from my day's sales can barely meet my personal expenses. I have to pay market dues and taxes for this stall. My stock is dwindling, but I cannot afford to replace it.
Many traders here share Ashaba's story of diminishing sales and low profit. Faced with difficult economic environment, many Ugandans are spending cautiously, which means traders like Ashaba are not earning as much as they used to. Some also say they are piling up debt levels. High interest rates and a current account deficit have dampened Uganda's economy. Weak exports have also been dragging down growth.
Ugandan economy is driven by consumers. GDP by composition, 70% or more than 75% actually of GDP is by consumption, household individuals. So if they are not borrowing, lending is whatever it is, so they consume less. Now, why are they not consuming? Probably they are worried about the income stream going forward.
The Bank of Uganda's Monetary Policy Committee has cut interest rates in a bid to stimulate growth. But economists say more needs to be done at the government level.
Nobody borrows just because interest rates have come down, and nobody lends just because the rates are going down. So we need to know that private sector credit is about opportunities. So is the economy generating opportunities for people to borrow? Because even when private sector credit grows and the demand in the economy is subdued, you're going to create non-performing assets.
Analysts also warn about the government's ambitious infrastructure program. Roads, bridges, power dams, and a new international airport are all being built on loans. The government says the projects are fueling job creation, but it's a risky position in an unfavorable global economy, which the Bank of Uganda blames on the US-China trade war. And for local traders like Ashaba, the volatility could be devastating. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
At the start of the prior hour, of course, we spoke about Turkey's incursion into northeastern Syria, Operation Peace Spring, they call it. Leaders from Egypt, Cyprus and Greece are now slamming what they describe as a unilateral Turkish escalation. In a joint press conference in Cairo, those at the trilateral meeting announced agreement to boost investment and trade between all three countries, which of course are on the eastern end of the Mediterranean. Since 2014, they've been working together to turn the eastern Mediterranean into a competitive market for natural gas. CGTN's Adel Maruki has the details.
The heads of states of Egypt, Greece and Cyprus have held their 7th tripartite meeting in Cairo on Wednesday. In recent years, they've formed a coalition to boost development between them and stand against a common foe, Turkey. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi warned that unilateral decisions in the region would escalate tension, in reference to Ankara. The Cypriot president, however, was more explicit.
Turkey's unacceptable practices and drilling in areas under the Cypriotic sovereignty are a blatant assault on the rights of the Cypriotic Republic and international law. We will resort to all available diplomatic means to halt Turkey's aggression. Cooperation agreed between us in energy will impact regional cooperation, which will contribute in the welfare and stability of the East Mediterranean region.
The three countries have announced plans to boost investments within the next 2 years. Egypt and Cyprus have agreed to cancel double taxation policies to increase trade between them. And they have previously agreed to set up a forum to create a regional gas market, collaborate in joint infrastructure, and offer competitive prices to transform the region into a major energy hub.
The summit has previously achieved many successes and is still progressing. It's working to maximize the gains from the energy sector, especially with recent drilling discoveries made. They want to create a powerful gas hub in the region to connect and export gas to Europe. They are forming a new political and economic power in the Mediterranean.
Egypt, Cyprus and Greece believe that development is a cornerstone of stability in the East Mediterranean region. The leaders have also agreed on joint perspectives in combating terrorism, illegal migration, and regional conflicts.
Egypt has been investing in a strategic location as a natural connector between Asia and Africa. With the Suez Canal development infrastructure, 2 natural gas liquefaction plants, it hopes it could become the center of distribution and trade for gas in the East Mediterranean. And with the announced 2,000 megawatts cable known as the Euro-Africa Interconnector, Egypt will be connecting electricity grids from Asia to Europe via North Africa, Greece and Cyprus. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore why the Bretton Woods institutions are concerned about rising global trade tensions. And we'll explore why the NBA is getting quite a bit of flack in mainland China when we come back.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
The APEC CEO Summit, the most influential annual gathering of business and government leaders in the Asia-Pacific. This November in Chile, join hundreds of delegates to discuss the challenges facing the world's fastest-growing region. Together, we will explore the advances we must make to achieve our goals and drive progress into the future. APEC CEO Summit Chile 2019, co-creating the future, improving lives together.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are 2 of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back at 18:33 GMT. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. Let's start in the Middle East, where President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey says the country has launched Operation Peace Spring. It's an incursion into northeastern Syria. The incursion comes in the wake of a sudden policy change by the White House, which withdrew American troops from the region, effectively leaving the Syrian Kurdish militia allies had been fighting with there vulnerable. Ankara says that the militants are linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party that has been waging an insurgency against Turkey's government since 1984. In North Africa, Tunisia's electoral body is expected to release the results of Sunday's parliamentary election. Now, the vote was a third since the uprising. Up to 15,000 candidates were competing for some 217 positions. Exit polls put the Ennahda party in the lead, followed by the Heart of Tunisia party of detained media mogul Nabil Karoui. Now, the party that wins the most seats has the right to nominate a prime minister. It's the most powerful person in Tunisia's current system of government. And finally, Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his Ugandan counterpart Yoweri Kaguta Museveni have agreed to form a joint commission to fast-track investments between the two countries. The Zimbabwean leader is in Uganda to explore opportunities for future bilateral investments. The two have agreed to convene an investment forum for both countries to share business opportunities. That's a run through your headlines. Now, the World Bank says as global trade tensions persist, investments have essentially been put on hold. The global lender argues that without that cash to boost economic growth and lay the foundations for future growth, poverty could rise. The US-China trade war, for instance, involving hundreds of billions of dollars in two-way trade, is right at the center of these global disputes. However, there are others, and they also include Washington's ongoing tiffs with the European Union, changing rules over US trade with Canada and Mexico, and of course, Brexit. This is a particular concern for Africa, where poverty is concentrated and economies are a hell of a lot more fragile. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are among forecasters who have cut projections for growth both in 2019 and 2020.
It's actually many advanced countries that have unilaterally returned to protectionism. So our message is to a certain extent directed towards those countries. We make a case for keeping markets open. At the same time, we make an appeal to developing countries, especially to large developing countries that have managed to grow, to embrace their new status. I think trade is still very important, but Africa could turn to itself. So there could be still a lot. It's a very big continent with enormous potential, both human potential but also natural resources. There could be a lot of trade within Africa. But for this to happen, the African market needs to be integrated. And so right now, Africa is, the countries in Africa are completely disjoined from each other, but also within countries very often.
The United States is no longer the most competitive economy in the world. Well, not at least according to the World Economic Forum's flagship Global Competitiveness Report. It's now ranked second behind Singapore. The slip is linked in part to President Donald Trump's trade wars. Now, the forum organizers have released an annual competitiveness report since 1979. It assesses which economies are well placed to see productivity and long-term growth. While the report noted that the US does remain an important innovation powerhouse and the world's second most competitive economy, some troubling signs have emerged. Singapore scored the highest in this report, but the forum noted that the country had benefited from trade diversion through its ports, and that, of course, had been triggered by the tariff battles between the world's top two economies. At 83.7 points, the US slipped from a score of 85.6 in 2018. Hong Kong rose 4 spots to claim third place with a score of 83.1.
The US losing ground a little bit this year, dropping to second, still a very strong performance, but we do see a few areas where the performance is worsening. One of them is health. So the healthy life expectancy in the US is going down, has been going down for a while, and actually is now lower than many emerging economies, including China. So Singapore takes the lead this year, reached the top, thanks to an extremely strong performance across all the pillars. So we have 12 pillars of competitiveness, from institutions to market efficiency, to innovation capability, to skills, health, macroeconomic stability. And Singapore does extremely well across the board. The only area where they're not so good is when it comes to the innovation ecosystem.
Now, it's not often that the worlds of sports and politics collide, but in this instance they have. The NBA is a target of quite a bit of outrage in China in the wake of a tweet by Houston Rockets general manager, a now deleted tweet, we should point out. Over the weekend, Daryl Morey set off an international firestorm when he tweeted support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. Here's some views of some fans in Beijing.
This is Dongdan Sports Center. It is home to some of the best street basketball players in Beijing. And yet, the controversy surrounding Daryl Morey's tweet echoes here at this park as well.
I've been watching the NBA since Kobe Bryant won his first championship with the Lakers. I'm a big fan of the Houston Rockets because of Yao Ming. To me, Morey's tweet challenged Chinese fans' bottom lines. He compounded the sport with his political view, a view that hurts our feelings.
Daryl Morey set off a firestorm in China over the weekend when he posted an image on Twitter that read, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." The backlash from China followed quickly. Business cooperation and sponsorships have come to a halt. On Tuesday, CCTV announced it would suspend its broadcasting of NBA preseason games.
I fully support the boycott. The broadcasts should only resume if there is a sincere apology. If this was coming from my favorite NBA star, I would immediately stop following him. We love the NBA, but we love our country more.
Basketball is huge in China. Its popularity skyrocketed following the stateside success of Yao Ming. Now the sport has an estimated 300 million fans nationwide, roughly 1/5 the population. The latest controversy, however, has cast a big shadow on NBA's partnerships with China. Su Qun, a well-known basketball commentator, says it took 30 years for the NBA to reach the success it has had in China. But now, because of one inappropriate remark, this multi-billion-dollar marriage is on the verge of falling out.
It's killing the momentum. I know Tencent has a 5-year broadcasting plan with the NBA that's worth over $1.5 billion US. NBA China, a company that's worth $3 to $4 billion, has many local sponsorships. Now everything has been thrown into doubt.
Su says the public outcry serves as a cautionary tale for professional leagues doing business in China. In his view, overseas expansion for a sports league means more than just drawing fans and making money. It is also about showing respect for different countries and the values that are important to them. Hu Huiyao, CGTN, Beijing.
Elsewhere, the world's largest ever international horticultural exhibition has wrapped up in Beijing. The 162-day event attracted millions of visitors from both home and abroad.
A resounding success. That's what the Secretary General of the International Exhibition Bureau said about the 2019 Beijing International Horticultural Expo. He said the success is also a proof of the vision, commitment, and preparation of the Chinese government and organizers.
The expo has touched the hearts and minds of millions of visitors. They have discovered the beauty and role of plants and nature. They have learned how important it is to protect nature and live greener and healthier lives.
162 days. Over 9.3 million visitors. Participants from some 110 countries, regions, and international organizations took part in the event, along with 120 unofficial exhibitors. Over 3,000 activities were held across an area of over 5 square kilometers, roughly the size of 500 football pitches. And almost 100 Chinese and international pavilions displayed the latest horticultural achievements and introduced innovative ideas about green development. These were some of the highlights of the 2019 Beijing International Horticultural Expo. But to Bernard Osterm, president of the International Association of Horticultural Producers, there's still more.
What I appreciate most is that Expo 2019 Beijing has been a tool for defining and illustrating the ecological vision of the People's Republic of China. Live green, live better lies at the heart of the message of AAPH, as we strive to be the world's champion for the power of plants.
And that also echoes China's ambition for its future development. According to Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, since the start of the new century, China has contributed to 1/4 of the increase in global green leaf area, and it will not abandon environmental protection in the future.
Facing the daunting tasks of growing the economy, improving people's lives, and enhancing environmental protection, we will stick to a holistic and balanced approach to pursue both high-quality economic development and high-standard environmental protection through reform and opening up.
And as the Chinese premier declared the official closing of the expo, organizers hope to use the site of the exhibition as a base to raise people's awareness about ecological protection and green development, not only in China, but in other parts of the world as well. Zheng Chunying, CGTN.
A new health-focused app is now available to help women and men detect early signs of breast cancer. The breast awareness app was launched in May this year by the Miami-based Pink Luminous Advocacy Project. It guides users through self-examinations, as CGTN's Nita Soledad Perez now reports.
Did you know breast cancer kills more than 41,000 people every year in the U.S.?
That's 113 people every day.
That's unacceptable. Breast cancer is the most common form of cancer affecting women around the globe. More than 2 million new cases were diagnosed just last year in men and women, according to the World Health Organization. Researchers know that early detection can save lives. And in a world where there's an app for everything, guess what? Now we have the first multilingual app for breast self-exams.
Step 1. Feel your breast in the shower.
I decided to create the app because I realized that women in their 20s and 30s and older women, but specifically the young generation, did not have an idea on how to do a breast self-examination.
A rise in diagnosis among younger women not getting regular mammograms also helped inspire app creator Marilyn Dance.
To live an awareness lifestyle is to enter into a routine where you have a breast self-examination routine where you're able to do it at home, that you understand how to do it, that you even know how to do it.
Using your fingertips.
The app is free, unisex, and downloads in the language set on your phone. Today it's available in English and Spanish. By next month it will expand to include Mandarin, Italian, and Portuguese. The goal was to create a platform to guide people through a self-exam.
As a woman, as a mother of daughters, and for me, it was a no-brainer to tell my girls about it, to make sure that they got on it. You know, millennials think they're going to live forever, but millennials also have gotten to a point where they don't trust Western medicine as much as they used to.
Both of these women had cancer scares. They understand the importance of education.
And I myself had a stage 1 breast cancer when I was 33. And thank God it was stage 1. And it was removed, and I took tamoxifen for 5 years. So for me, this is something that is just crucial. I have to be on top of it.
The app's creators say it should be used in concert with regular doctor visits. Another tool that could help save lives, especially in underserved minority communities. Nita Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
Quick run through commodity prices for you. We're going to be focusing on two of these for the time being. Brent crude just over 1% higher at 14.03 GMT. In fact, it's about 2 cents off this price at the moment. Cocoa futures in London about 0.63% lower at the same time. But even at those levels, cocoa prices are still 5% higher so far this year, just about $2,300. Platinum stocks getting quite a boost on that metal. Spot prices in the US up over 11% so far this year, and that has helped to drag share prices of platinum miners in South Africa to levels we've not really seen since April 2014. Here's what's coming up next. We'll introduce you to an innovator who's turning electronic waste into entirely new gadgets in Nigeria.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Every single year, Nigeria generates over 1 million metric tons of electronic waste. It's a major contributor to environmental degradation. But one young inventor over there has turned his passion for science and tech into a viable trade. He essentially dismantles broken computer components on one end and builds up new equipment like power banks and even specialized foot-operated mice on the other. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with that story on Grassroots.
27-year-old inventor Zhang Bot and his team sorting out what many would describe as trash. But for Zhang, this is treasure. His love for science and technology stemmed from his childhood days, and Zhang is driven to contribute his own quota to locally made products. And one of his successful innovations is his power bank.
Most of the products we see in the market, we see made in Japan, made in different countries, but you hardly see made in Nigeria. So that kept me wondering that I have to do something, because change starts with an individual. So I want to see that change, and which has to start from me.
Zhang has got a diploma in computer application, but is mostly self-taught, relying mainly on online research. Every single component used for his innovation is sourced from electronic waste. It's his main consideration for ensuring a safe environment.
What we are experiencing today is the global warming. And what is responsible for the global warming? Electronic waste is contributing towards the global warming by mismanaging the electronic waste, by burning it through incinerating. So once this electronic waste is harnessed and recycled in a proper way, it will save the environment from global warming.
Zhang's hard work and discipline have earned him several awards, including the federal government's National Micro, Small and Medium Enterprise Award. Among his other innovations are the foot mouse, made specifically for physically challenged persons. Zhang continues to push the boundaries of innovation in Nigeria. He's currently working on other interesting technologies like the automatic candlelight quencher and the sound filter. He hopes to push his products into the African market soon. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Play 2, Nigeria.
Uganda's fishing sector is recovering from years of ecological damage and low yields, mainly caused by overfishing. Leading that recovery are small-scale fishermen who are breeding stocks of tilapia and catfish in fish farms far away from the country's depleted lakes. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with that story.
After years of decline due to overfishing, Uganda's stock of fish is now getting a much-needed boost from the country's small-scale fishermen. Fishermen are now engaging in fish farming with relatively small farms of about 14 acres. The farms can produce up to 3 million fish per year, mainly catfish and tilapia. Justus Lutaisire is among the farmers who opted for fish farming to close the gap in the industry.
The fish stocks have been going down as the human population increases. So the gap between supply and demand increases. And when it increases, the price of fish has been going high. So it becomes very clear that it would be unwise to depend on fishing alone. We need to relieve some pressure from the wild stocks by growing the fish ourselves.
According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, Uganda produces up to 15,000 tons of fish from aquaculture, including those from fish farms. An estimated 20,000 ponds are spread out throughout this landlocked country. But like most countries around the world, the impact of climate change is strongly felt by fish farmers whose businesses are directly impacted by severe rain.
I agree that climate change has contributed to decreased fish abundance in Uganda and in Africa as a whole. But also you have to consider case by case. What do you mean by this climate change? Has it got several effects. For example, if there's too much rain and there's flooding, there's washing of all these farm effluents, industrial effluents into the water bodies. So you get a lot of algal blooms, and these have an effect on oxygen and abundance of fish. Some of them can cause fish kills.
Last year, figures from the Bank of Uganda showed that the country exported fish worth $171 million, making it the fourth top export after coffee, gold, and dried legumes. And despite the challenges, Lutaisire has his sights on expansion as demand grows and market prices keep improving.
We have about 3.6 million fingerlings for tilapia and about 200,000 per month for catfish, with about 2.4 million fingerlings for catfish per annum. But we are still expanding. We intend to produce 1 million fingerlings for each of the species. So we'll be having 24 million per annum for the two species.
The growing number of fish farms in Uganda can only bring good news for now. Authorities are hoping that this will ease the pressure on the country's lakes, including the world-famous Lake Victoria. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
The Accra Fashion Week is taking place at the moment. This year's theme is focusing on the year of return. It's part of a broader campaign by Ghana's government to persuade the African diaspora to reinvest in the continent. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
The year of the return was the core theme at this year's Accra Fashion Week, an attempt to encourage Africa's descendants to invest back into the continent. American designer Clavon Leonard was one of those showcasing his designs, which paid tribute to Ghana's influential Ashanti community.
The collection was really inspired this year because I think black symbolizes strength and gold represents tried in the fire. So I combined these two, and it was my inspiration behind this collection because I think that's what, black Americans stand for. I think that's what Africa stands for, the richness of culture and the strength of being black.
As one of the highlights on the African fashion calendar, the event provides a key platform for local designers too.
Africans, we have had enough of the inferiority. We have had enough of the limitations. We need to rise and make things work together again. And so my collection is actually talking about we Africans. You could see the flag of all the African countries in there. So what I am trying to say is that Africans, we can do it one as an individual. We all need to come together and make things work. And so enjoy my collection. Thank you.
The 4-day event closed in the Ghanaian capital on Sunday. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And finally, a quick run through the currencies here for you. So the rand still essentially over 15 to the dollar today, but we've got some interesting data on the macro front. So Treasury has laid out the conditions for bailing out Eskom yet again. You will recall, of course, it's a big drag on public finances, among other things. These are the main ones. Daily updates on company liquidity, no bonus payouts to executives. It's a miracle how that was even happening. And the cash provided by taxpayers can only be used to settle principal and interest payments, and pretty much nothing else. Will Eskom stick to that? We'll find out and update you. That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour or so. There's several ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.